Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you and your family are safe and well. My name is Nam McKay of Nam McKay Connects, and I'm sitting in for Donna Miller today as your program host. As you know, Purse Power is working to help women use their massive purchasing power to drive positive change. Purse Power believes that if women who make all of the purchasing decisions would choose to buy from the companies that support women, and if we could create a funding stream for battered women's shelters in the process, we could shatter glass ceilings and change lives. We will be in meeting format today, and we'll be taping the program. And videos for Purse Power shows are always available on the website at pursepower.com under the Let's Share the Journey tab. And the write-ups and podcasts are in Nam McKay's website. People have told us over and over how impressed they are with the quality of speakers that we have on this show. If this is your first time here, please join us every Friday at 10 a.m. Central and look at our prior episodes. You may always go to our website, pursepower.com, on Monday to register for the upcoming Friday session. Now, let me introduce our esteemed guest, Dr. Alan Weiss. He's the author of over 500 articles and 60 books, which is enormous, including his bestseller, $1 Million Consulting, and his newest book, $1 Million Influence. Dr. Weiss is the founder and CEO of the Summit Consulting Group, Inc., and has attracted leading clients such as Merck and Hewlett-Packard, GE, Mercedes-Benz, State Street Corporation, Times Mirror Group, the Federal Reserve, the New York Times Corporation, Toyota, and over 500 other leading organizations. Dr. Weiss is an inductee into the Professional Speaking Hall of Fame and is the concurrent recipient of the National Speakers Association Council of Peers Award of Excellence, which represents the top 1% of professional speakers in the world, which is amazing. He is also a fellow of the Institute of Management Consultants, one of only 2 people in history holding both designations. Success Magazine cited him as an editorial devoted to his work as a worldwide expert in executive education. The New York Post called him one of the most highly regarded independent consultants in America. So he's the winner of the prestigious Axiom Award for Excellence in Audio Presentation and the recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award of the American Press Institute, and was one of only 7 ever awarded. Dr. Weiss holds an annual thought leadership conference, which draws famous experts as speakers from around the world. Dr. Weiss will be sharing his insights on building a $1 million consulting business. So welcome, Dr. Weiss.
Thank you, Nan. I appreciate that. Very nice of you.
Well, to begin, please tell us your story. Give us a brief overview of your background and how you arrived at this place in your life and in your career.
Well, when I got out of undergraduate school at Rutgers, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I wound up working at Prudential Insurance. That's where the placement guy put me. And I figured, okay, I'll be here a few years. I'll become president of Prudential Insurance. Well, that wasn't to be. And after about 4 years, I had begun writing these little articles. I always loved to write. And a search firm found me, and they placed me with a training firm in Princeton, New Jersey. And I spent 11 years there going around the world and learning the training business and running Asia and running Latin America, running the US. And then I was recruited to be president of a consulting firm, behavioral consulting firm here in Providence. I live outside of Providence, Rhode Island. And I was there for 15 months and I was fired. The owner of the firm and I hated each other. He was W. Clement Stone. He had $450 million. And he preached positive mental attitude. And I told him that his cause and effect were reversed. He didn't have $450 million because he had a positive mental attitude. He had a positive mental attitude because he had $450 million. And if he gave everyone $450 million, everybody would have a positive mental attitude. He didn't like that, so he fired me. And When he fired me, I decided that nobody would ever fire me again, that I would only be on my own. And my wife said, I'm married for 54 years. She said at the time, today I'm married 54 years, but at the time in 85, she said, get serious. And so I did. And so I called everyone I knew. I told them what I was doing. And I decided I would work for Fortune 1000 companies. And I did. And I started to write books. And I wrote a book on innovation. I wrote a book on behavior. I wrote a book on strategy. And then the fourth book was going to be Confessions of a Consultant, but it turned into $1 Million Consulting. And $1 Million Consulting took off. And I was, because it fed my ego, I was answering questions for free from consultants all over the world for 4 or 5 years. And I said, enough of this, I'm going to charge. And my corporate work went down and my private work with consultants went up. And today I might do 1 or 2 corporations a year, but it's purely entrepreneurs around the world. And that's the life I lead. So in 3 weeks ago, I was in Australia. Last week, my wife and I were in London. And wherever my wife feels like going, we go, and I attract people and we have some fun and we do business. So, 60 some odd books later, here we are. My next book comes out in March. It's called Sentient Strategy. And it's a totally new approach to strategy post-pandemic. That's my story.
Do you have a publisher, or do you do self-publishing, or how do you do it?
Well, 2 or 3 of my books are self-published, but I've had 8 publishers. And I have an agent, but McGraw-Hill and John Wiley have published most of my top-selling books.
Okay, interesting. I too have been married 54 years, so we have that in common, I'll tell you. I would like to ask you a question about the pandemic. With the pandemic behind us and probably some tumultuous times ahead, I think leadership has never been more important. What are the qualities that you believe that leaders really must have to navigate these kinds of times?
Well, I believe leaders are made, not born. I believe there are skill sets and behaviors you can acquire. And, I've been in boardrooms all over the world. And my feeling is that, one, leaders need to be consistent. They need to be, people need to see them as consistent in how they act in the processes they use. They can't decide one thing one day for somebody and another thing the next day for somebody else on the exact same issue. So they can't be chaotic. They have to be consistent. The second thing is they have to be resilient. And they have to be able to not just bounce back from setbacks, they have to bounce forward. They have to use setbacks and defeats to learn and move forward. The third thing is they have to be able to deal with high degrees of ambiguity, because the world is ambiguous today and it's going to get worse. And so they can't expect the same old, same old. In the 50s, you can expect what happened 2 years ago is going to happen 2 years from now, no longer. And the reason I created Sentient Strategy, this new book, is that there is no way on earth to have a strategy that looks at 5 or 10 years. It's a daydream. You can look at a year, maybe. So they need to be able to work through ambiguity. And the fourth thing is they need to practice what I call referent leadership. And that is, you can have leadership that's carrot and stick. I can punish you, I can reward you. You can have leadership that's hierarchical. I'm the executive vice president of X. But referent leadership means that people believe in you. Call it charisma if you like. But people have to believe in you. If they believe in you, they'll follow you. And to me, those 4 or 5 traits are very important for leaders today. And I'll just add one more, and that is they better have perspective and a sense of humor. You can't take yourself too seriously, and you have to be able to compare things. So you and I are contemporaries, more or less. So I've lived through Vietnam. I've lived through the Cuban Missile Crisis. I've lived through Woodstock and through the Beatles, through the assassination of Martin Luther King and John Kennedy and Bobby Kennedy, through the cities burning. I can go on and on. And so please don't tell me that Ukraine is the end of the world. I'm not saying that what's happening there isn't horrible, but I am telling you that we all need perspective. And if we don't have perspective, we think that one customer hanging up on us is terrible, whereas it's really to be expected. There are people today who when 3 people unsubscribe from their newsletter, they go crazy. It's to be expected. And so perspective is vital too.
I think that's very perceptive yourself. You've written 60 books, I believe, and have spoken to business leaders with some of the most prominent companies in the whole country. How have you used your books and speaking engagements to build your business? And the second question that's similar to that is, if we're just starting out in this area, what would you recommend we do?
Okay, so the first question is, we have to practice what I call shameless promotion. And it looks like this. If you get up in the morning and you feel that I have to pay the bills, I have to follow up on some people who haven't returned my calls, I have to do what they're saying I hate doing, that's a long, slow crawl through enemy territory. And you feel you have to sell, which is taking people's money. If you wake up and say, I have tremendous value to give, I can't wait to see people because I can help them, now you're giving something. So if you're not taking, but you're giving, you want to see anybody you can. And so your attitude, whether you're speaking or conversing or whatever it is, has to be, I am here to help you. I can legitimately help you. So the shameless promotion is being able to say, you have some interesting issues. I can really help you. And, I'm watching out here to my right is my yard and the dogs are out there. If we leave the gate open by mistake at the top of the hill, the dogs will run out the open gate. They don't stop and do a risk analysis. They run through the open gate, and we all need to run through the open gate. All right. So we use our intellectual property, whether it's in books or anything else, to demonstrate to people we can be of help. Now, I think the second question you asked was, if you were just starting today, what would you do? If you're just starting out today, get a coach. Avoid the mistakes that everybody has made. The best people in business, entertainment, sports, you name it, the best people have coaches. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's a sign of strength. And you need coaches to help accelerate your launch. Don't try to do it yourself because there's so much bad advice out there. There's so many bad norms out there. I pioneered value-based pricing in the 90s, and I disrupted the solo consulting profession. If you charge by the hour or by the day, you are unethical because the longer it takes, the more you make, but the client deserves a shorter resolution. And so that's just a brief example of what you have to learn early if you're going to be successful.
Now, what did you call that? Shameless promotion, was it?
Shameless self-promotion.
Self-promotion. I really appreciate you saying something like that because it is difficult to get out there and say, I'm wonderful. I mean, you kind of think to yourself, oh, it's hard to do. It's hard to just say that. But if you don't believe in yourself, who's going to believe in you?
Well, I've got news for you. And, I'm safely sitting here remotely, but women are far worse at it than men.
I think you're right. I think you are. We've been kind of trained to not do that and, be the one that's promoting themselves, but we need to in this case. I really loved looking at your website, and I would strongly suggest everybody go look at that. You have a very interesting approach because it appears to me that you have kind of one package that you start with, and that just exemplifies what you just said. You explain to people who you are and how you can help them through your books and materials. That sounds like what you're doing in your website as well, to be able to present this and give them everything for one price. And then they can really go through. And from that point, that's the point where you contact them.
I call it the accelerant curve, meaning that you start here with free books and free downloads and free everything. And then you begin to pay for some coaching and then some more in-depth things. And then you go all the way over to my elite programs. Now, some people go right to the elite programs because I have a strong brand and they've heard of me. Some people go down the accelerant curve. Both ways are fine. But I think that we need to be able to provide things for people at different levels of their own growth. And I also think that, people love to try to get, people love trying not to spend money, but they hate missing value. And so, I use the analogy of an auto dealer who says, here are the keys to the car. You take a test drive. Person comes back and says, that was a really nice car and it's within my price range. And the dealer says, okay, but you look really cool in that car. So I do look cool. He says, but if you come around the corner here, I've got an even better car. You look cooler in that car. He says, yeah, it's out of my price range. He says, well, why don't you drive it? And pretty soon what you find is that, you evolve, you migrate up because people hate to turn down value. When I was fired, a woman called me and I had this little Mercedes Benz at the time. She says to me, she asked me three questions. Are you Alan Weiss? I said, yeah. She said, do you own a Mercedes 450 SLC? So I thought it was a recall. And I said, yes. And she says to me, how'd you like to own one of the first car phones in New England? And I thought for 3 seconds, and I said, how soon can you get here? And so I had a handset. Excuse me. I had a handset hardwired to the dash, but I had my car phone. And I was never without one until they gave us these things. So I find that if you make an emotional connection, people respond. And for anybody who wants to listen to me on any topic at all, I will tell you this. Logic makes people think, emotion makes them act. So an intellectual connection is insufficient. You can't play chess with a buyer, You have to get into sort of a rugby scrum, and it's all about emotion. And if I feel I'm missing something, if I feel that there's a need you can meet, because beyond every business objective is a personal objective. If you can uncover the personal objective, you'll get a sale.
I really love that. I love what you're saying, because I think I have tended to approach things on a more intellectual basis, or a more, hey, here's this, here's that. And you're right, you have to establish that one-on-one. And if you know me better, you're going to maybe buy from me more likely, huh? Is that what you're saying?
Ultimately, we're all selling ourselves. It's a matter of trust. People buy based on trust.
Okay. Do you think it's harder or easier to build $1 million consulting practice in, let's say, difficult times? And then the second question that you would address, because it seems like you can handle two, is what are the key factors that significantly influence your chances of success? So harder or easier to build a business now? And what are those key factors that are going to make us successful, or at least influence us?
The questions are related, because if you have the right factors, it doesn't matter what the economic times are. It doesn't matter. Some of the greatest companies in the country were established during the Great Depression, for example. I think GE was one at the time, and others as well. If you Google it, you'll find out. In the 20s and 30s, great companies were formed. But the point is this, that you need you need a tremendous amount of confidence in yourself. You need self-esteem. And one of the problems I work with the people I coach is they have insufficient self-esteem. So they can't charge the fees they should charge, not because they're not delivering value. They don't have the esteem to say, I'm worth it. And, I say to people sometimes, look in the mirror and say the fee is $100,000. And they'll say the fee is And I'll say, is the person in the mirror too tough? I mean, what does that mean exactly? So it's a question of feeling good about yourself, and not enough of us do. And I can tell right away in people's self-talk. They'll say to me, well, I have a struggle with. And I'll say, stop saying that. You might have a challenge. You might have an interesting situation, but stop telling me you have a struggle. Stop telling me you feel awkward. So we have to be a peer with our buyer. We have to decide, this is my value, this is who buys it, and I am a peer with this buyer. And you have to walk into a buyer's office unafraid. And when I wrote a book on fearless leadership, you have to walk in unafraid. I've never walked into a buyer's office and had the buyer take money from me. And so stop worrying. My father was a paratrooper in the Second World War. He jumped in the jungles of New Guinea against enemy guns. And, he lived to 99 years and 11 months. But nobody's shooting at us. So if he could do that, you can walk into a buyer's office. So the traits that you need are consistent. The economy doesn't matter, So many speakers, in particular, when the pandemic hit, panicked. They went crazy because their contracts were canceled. And they said, I can't go anyplace. But the fact is, we can speak remotely. We're doing this remotely, and it's highly valuable. And so they had the wrong attitude. Instead of saying, I'm more valuable than ever, they said, oh God, woe is me. And that's a question of self-esteem. So the traits you need are tremendous self-confidence, high esteem. Again, you need a perspective. So you don't take yourself too seriously, and you're not as high as your last victory or as low as your last defeat, right? You have an even keel. And you need a support system. And your support system could be family, or it could be colleagues, or it could be associations you belong to. I have a worldwide community. And while you and I are speaking here, people are on allensforums.com comparing notes on marketing and fees and family life and so forth. So I create communities so that people can get together, because the trouble with this business, Nan, is people are lonely. They feel alone. So the solo practitioner, it's funny, Most solo practitioners are refugees from large companies. And then they went out on their own, and now they have a worse boss.
I get that one. That's funny. I think you're right. Let me ask you a couple of questions. Let me ask a technical question. This allensforum.com, I think, is what I just wrote down. So is that a website, and how do you do that community, or is it a Facebook group, or how are you doing it?
That's it's a private website platform that I own. And if you've ever been in any of my workshops or events or experiences or whatever, it's free. If you haven't been, I charge a nominal amount, and you're in it for life. It's a one-time fee, because that just prevents everybody from getting in there. But because I want people with a certain commonality in terms of entrepreneurialism and so forth. The fee is $4.95, and that's a lifetime fee. But if you've been in something that I've done, you have automatic admittance. And you also, besides my public blog, which is on my website, I have called the contrarianconsulting.com. I have a private blog, Alan and the Gang, which also you get admission to for that. So I really believe that you have to touch people in a variety of different media, a variety of different ways. But the value is in bringing people together. Now, for the purposes of your audience, the value to them, it's a connectivity of bringing their clients together. So I happen to deal in the retail space. I'm dealing with individuals. But most people in consulting are dealing in the wholesale space. They deal with organizations. And bringing buyers together, bringing people together so they can share, is a huge value these days, especially with a hybrid marketplace, right? So I think when we think in terms of community, I hate this word tribes, it's too exclusive. I think in terms of communities which are inclusive.
I think that is very wise. But let me go back to something that you said earlier. How do you help people build their self-esteem? What do you do? Do you give them the keys to community, or what do you do?
You have to find out. Excuse me. I just came back from London. It's dry airplane air. You have to find out why that person's self-esteem is low. There's no blanket approach. And so if you find out, in most cases, our default position is negative. We did something wrong. Why is that? We did something wrong. I blew it. Let me find out why. Our default position is in positive. Hey, that worked really well. Why? What we have to do, and what I help people do, is isolate negatives and generalize positives. So if you fail to make a sale, you don't say, I'm a lousy marketer. You say, on this day, in this place, with this person, I didn't make a sale. That's what happened. If you do make a sale, you don't say, I'm lucky. You say, I've turned into quite a marketer. Isolate negatives, generalize positives. Now, you don't think that's important. You think of kids. If a kid misses something on the athletic field and you say to the kid, you're really awkward out there, that kid will probably never play sports again. It happens, Nan, right? Yeah. But if you say, don't worry, no one could have made that kick, the kid will say, okay, good. I'm in good company. Nobody could have done it. If a kid says, I got 100 in history, and you say, well, you got lucky, didn't you? You're not as good as your sister. But if you say, hey, you turned into a real scholar, that's going to motivate that kid to keep doing well in history. So in terms of self-esteem, you want to help people to isolate negatives and focus on positives. You want their default position to be positive, not negative. And I focus people, first thing in the morning, last thing in the evening, you think of positive things. So I get up, what are 3 positive things I'm going to do today? At the end of the day, what are 3 positive things I did do today? That helps your subconscious. Now, I'll say one more thing about self-esteem. Some of it is damaged because of a therapeutic problem. You were told something long ago you don't even realize anymore. It was a sibling, it was a parent, but you can't undo that. And so you need a therapeutic approach to get it out. Now, I'm very careful when I coach, because if I find that those are the issues, in other words, I've worked with people who, no matter how successful they are, they still feel guilty they're not working hard enough. That needs a professional intervention from a counselor. So I have a PhD, but I'm not a clinician. So if people start with their self-esteem and start feeling good about themselves, they help other people feel good about themselves, and it makes you an object of interest. And one of the key points of marketing that people don't really think about is if you're an object of interest, people want you around.
When you tell people, hey, I think this is maybe beyond me and you need to see a therapist, how do you do that? What language do you use?
I try to get them to what I call conceptual agreement. And I'll say something like this. I'll say, so Tom, it seems to me that an issue that keeps being repeated here is that your father told you that no matter how successful you were, you'd never be as successful as your older brother. Is that right? And he said, yeah, I can't get that out of my mind. And you say, well, would it be helpful, because you know that's silly at this point in time, right? So I do know it's silly, but I can't get it out of my mind. So, well, there are ways to extirpate this. There are ways to get this out of your system. And I would involve I would suggest therapy, because I've been through therapy myself and I find it very useful. Is that something you'd consider? So I try to get that kind of conceptual agreement. I also have several clinicians I know who are effective in this, and I can even make a recommendation. But, you know, we all suffer from that. Now, to most of us, it's a lesser degree. You know, our parents, somebody told us something and it sort of sticks in our minds. But sometimes it's serious and it's devastating.
Well, it can be. And you're right. That may be the thing that is just absolutely stopping them from doing anything. I think I heard you say that the way that you approach it on the positive and negative is in a very factual way without putting an emotion into it. You're simply saying, here's what I am seeing, even on my positive or in my negative. It's just the facts of what happened rather than giving it a value. Am I right on that?
That's a great observation. And I'll tell you something about consulting and coaching in general. You have to base everything you do on empirical evidence and observed behavior, not opinion, not supposition, not guesswork. Because the client will say to you, why do you believe that? And you say, because at the meeting, here's what you said. Do you recall that? In the hallways, here's what happened. Do you remember seeing that? Right. And if you can deal with empirical evidence and observed behavior, you're fine. But when you start saying, you know what your problem is? Your problem is you're not a team player. You got a big problem, right?
Yeah, and you damage that self-esteem you're trying to build.
Right. But if you say to me, Alan, I have to ask you a question. Every Friday morning we have this meeting, and every Friday morning you're 15 minutes late. Why is that? That's an empirical evidence. And I say, well, it's childcare. On Fridays, I have to take my kids in for childcare, and I can't quite make this meeting. Okay, now you know. It's had nothing to do with being a team player. It's a legitimate problem.
You know, I'm curious. You said that you and your wife, if she likes to go to Australia, you go to Australia, find somebody to speak to there. So are you a speaker? Do you do speaking engagements today?
Yeah, I do. I used to do, I don't know, maybe 40 a year. Probably today I do 15. But I'm probably the highest level of non-celebrity speakers. You know, I'm not a politician or an entertainer. But I enjoy doing it. And I will do it. I used to do it for marketing purposes, but now I do it because, you know, financially it's attractive. But I also get in front of other kinds of groups. I spoke once for the National Feedlot and Grain Association, who did nothing but raise cattle, right? And the prior speakers would put pictures up of cows and cuts of meat and things. And I talked about innovation, you know. And so those are exciting things. I talked for a group in Beaver Creek, Colorado, I think, who were technologists. And they had somebody at 8 a.m. who was giving a report, and I was on at 9. And I got up there and I said, I don't know if I should be here because I listened to the previous guy for an hour and I have no idea what he said. It was that esoteric. So I enjoy learning that way.
Well, since you said you're not apologetic, you're unapologetic about your fee. What do you charge for those speaking engagements?
I'm a $35,000 speaker without any bells and whistles. In other words, you want to videotape me and spread around some more money, but I'm 35. And I just find that's a comfortable place to be for me. Most of the people I hire for my events, like, you know, the Dan Pinks of the world and Bob Cialdini and people like that, they're about that same place.
I think I've started too late. I'm thinking, gosh, if it takes me that long to get to 35,000, I think I'm going to be 100 by the time I get it.
Hey, Nan, I'm going to give you some free advice here. Okay. I was speaking to a big group of consultants once, and somebody said to me, "What's your fee?" And I said, my fee's 35,000. And I walked off the stage. My wife says to me, "Your fee is 25,000. When did it become 35?" I said, "Just then." Because as I was about to say it, I realized I'm too cheap.
I love it. Yeah, in your book, and I have bought one of your books, and I'm going to certainly buy more. In your book, you explain how to raise capital, how to attract clients, and you talk about creating a marketing plan and how to grow your business into $1 million per year. So, what are the common things that you see entrepreneurs do to undermine themselves, other than the self-esteem, which we know that's one of the issues? And then how can we not fall into one of those common traps?
Well, first of all, $1 million is a metaphor. Some people lead the life they want to lead, for 400,000 or 600,000, whatever it is. I don't care. Or some people need 2 million or 3 million. I don't care. But $1 million just is a nice metaphor. It's a nice level. So there's nothing magical about the number. But in terms of your question, what undermines people? What undermines people is they don't think big enough. They think very small. And that means they don't appreciate their own value. So you have to appreciate the kind of value you have, which means you have to articulate it first. Now, again, I believe in the 1% solution, which is if you improve by 1% every day in 70 days, you're twice as good. You can do this on a calculator, right? 1% a day in 70 days, you're twice as good because of compound interest.
Yeah.
Not enough people do this. And so the key here is that you have to understand that it's not what you do, it's what you create. This might be the 1% for some of the people watching this. So what you do is your methodology. You coach, you consult, you run focus groups, who cares? What you create, higher revenues, bigger profit, less attrition, bigger market share for your clients, that's what's important. So you have to focus on the outcome for your clients, and that's how you grow a big business. If you start talking about your methodology, you're a commodity. Everybody does sales skills training. Who cares, really? So you have to talk about outcomes and not inputs. The second thing is, in order to not undermine yourself, is that you have to use the proper norms. And we tend to use the wrong metrics. We tend to use other people's metrics. And people say, you can't do that. Well, who says I can't do that? You have to be certified in this. No, you don't. I mean, these certificates from coaching institutes, sorry to irritate anyone listening, but please, okay? We're all coaches, all right? We've all coached in our lives. I have a book called $1 Million Coaching. And I ask at the beginning, has anyone ever come to you for advice? And if so, have you given it to them? And if so, did it work? And if so, congratulations, you're a coach. I mean, that's what it takes. So we undermine ourselves by not giving ourselves enough leeway, by using the wrong norms, and by not putting enough value on what we do in terms of the outputs that we provide. And I think the final thing is that the first investment we have to make, the best return on investment we'll ever get is an investment in ourselves. And people tell me forever, Alan, I really can't have you coach me yet. I need to make some more money, and then I can afford to have you coach me. Well, the problem is you're not making more money because I'm not coaching you. All right. And so you've got the horse and buggy, and you got the horses trying to push the buggy. If you can't invest in yourself and you don't believe in that return, you're in the wrong line of work.
That is really interesting. We have a question from our audience, and it's, how do you see the difference between someone who's confident and someone who needs to brag about how great they are?
That's a great question. So I'm going to give you some definitions, okay? Confidence is the honest-to-God belief that you can help other people, okay? Arrogance is the honest-to-God belief you have nothing left to learn yourself. And smugness is arrogance without the talent. A lot of smug people around. So people have to brag about what they do, have low self-esteem. With a lot of braggadocio, there's low self-esteem. So you have to, in other words, you don't trust your own presence. Your own presence is suspicious. You have to tell people how good you are. You have to prove how good you are. And, I had that problem very early in my life, and I, finally got over it, but it's bruising. You don't make a whole lot of friends that way. So I believe you go right up to the edge of confidence and arrogance. Occasionally you skate over the edge, you bring yourself back, but that's where you need to be, because people want to deal with people who are very, very sure of themselves. That's who experts are, So an expert doesn't say, well, if you think we should do this, an expert says, here's what you should do. And that's why you hire an expert. So I think that people who have to brag have an esteem issue, but I think people who are very confident that they can help people aren't afraid to tell them that fact. I can help you.
And people who think there's nothing to learn today, I mean, how could anybody think that? I look at the technology and the difference in what we need to know now that we're online, now that everything is on the internet. It's just humongous. I mean, every day I'm learning something.
And let me tell you two things. First of all, somewhere in the 1880s, I think, the commissioner of the U.S. Patent Office recommended they close it down because everything that could be invented had been invented, in his opinion. The second thing is, given the example you just gave, today it's not so much a question of how much you know, it's a question of how much you turn away, because we're drowning in misinformation, we're drowning in disinformation. If you look at social media, particularly Facebook, it's nothing but a huge confirmation bias swamp, where people will only read and digest things that agree with them, and they will not read or try to digest anything that disagrees with them, which is just confirmation bias. So as much as learning is important today, being discriminatory in what we should not be listening to is equally important.
I think that is so relevant to what is happening in a lot of areas today. There's no question about it. Let me talk a little bit about purse power and how that relates. It's primarily engaged in helping women business owners and leaders. Do you see any special, maybe insights or capabilities that women might bring to the table that are particularly valid and valuable right now?
Well, let's see how many people I can irritate in your audience at the moment.
I love it.
A long time ago, you mentioned the American Press Institute in my introduction.
Yeah.
And I was going over there, and we were on a shuttle bus, and the woman next to me turns out to be Helen Fisher, who wrote a book, I think, called The Second Sex. This is, I don't know, 20 years ago. But Helen turned to me and she said, "Tell me something about yourself, what you do." And nobody ever asked me that. She was fascinated. So I did that and I asked her. And she said, "Well, how do you feel women are in consulting?" We got into this discussion. And at one point I said to her, I'd be walking up the street with my wife and my daughter. And my wife said, "Where are we going?" And I'd say, "It's the red house over there." My wife would say, "The house isn't red, it's pink." I said, "Well, it's the red family." And my daughter would say, "Well, it's actually fuchsia or something." So Helen explains to me that women have more cones and rods in their eyes than men do, and they see colors differently. Well, that was a revelation. And I stopped getting so upset with my wife for pointing out that she saw colors differently. And I think we have to start paying attention to this. Now, basically, behaviorally, women are much better suited to be consultants than men because they see things in what Helen describes as a web-like manner. So if we're in an office together, I've got a rifle shot and I'm saying, okay, I want to get the sale. This person said this and that. But when we walk out, if it's a woman with me, she'll say, "Yes, but did you see what was on the walls? Did you see how he did this?" And so the woman is thinking much more expansively than I am. So women are much more empathic naturally than men are, in my opinion. So given that, they make much better consultants. The problem is they're lousy marketers because they will not engage in shameless promotion and they don't sing their praises enough. I wrote a book with Marshall Goldsmith called Life Storming for John Wiley. And Marshall and I were comparing notes. He says he's the greatest corporate coach in the world, and I'm the greatest entrepreneurial coach in the world. That's how he puts it. Good enough for me. But what we talked about was, at the time, most people who called themselves life coaches were women, most. And there was obviously this need for it. A lot of people going into it, a market, but most of these life coaches were penniless. They weren't making money because they weren't charging enough. And so I think that if I had to draw a line of distinction here, women have these natural behavioral and mental skills and emotional skills to be excellent consultants and coaches, and they are. But the problem is they don't market themselves with sufficient assertiveness and with sufficient fee levels to be as successful as they should be.
That I think that's interesting and true. I also wondered as you were talking, I think some people are more conceptual naturally, and some people are more structured naturally.
Sure.
I mean, some people need to see the big picture first. Some people like to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and okay, I'll figure it out. Do you think there's a difference in women and men where they're in what you just said, where they're maybe more conceptual?
No, that's not gender related at all. No,
Okay.
there are men and women who are on both sides of that continuum. I'll tell you something interesting and anybody listening to this, please send your cards and letters to Nan, not to me, okay? Because I don't want to. There was an organization in Boston, I don't know, the Massachusetts Association of Female Executives or something like that. And it was, all women membership. And they asked me to come and speak. And I said to them, my first question is, why did you ask me to speak? Obviously you want female role models here. And so they said, no, we don't. They said, we want role models of excellence. And we want role models of people who succeeded. And I was so invigorated by that, I can't tell you, because I think whether we're talking about schools or business or investing in ourselves, what we all have to do is we all have to worry about who's really at the top here? What are the best practices? And how can I emulate those? And that's how we all get better. So it's important, while we recognize certain distinctions, and I certainly do in terms of empathy among gender, I think it's important that we don't categorize and that we don't put labels on things, because, I don't believe that there's a Gen X and a Gen Z and a boomer and this and that. I mean, I believe in ages, but insofar as a lot of boomers I know identify quite well with millennials and disagree with their colleagues and vice versa. But once we put a label on somebody and drop them in a drawer, they're forever categorized. And it's a real problem. It's a problem in businesses, the way they treat their employees as well.
Interesting. Let's talk about that latest book that you wrote called $1 Million Influence. And then maybe you can come back on the show and tell us about your next one when you write it.
Next one's coming out in March, Dan.
Okay, so it's
That's strategies in March. Yeah. I always have one cooking.
If people go to Amazon and they can just find a whole lot, or your website, they can find a lot about your books and definitely get them. But I want to know about this latest book. I mean, the title is a lot the same as some of your other ones. What led you to write this one?
Well, this is co-authored with a guy named Gene Moran. And Gene's a former naval captain, a ship driver, if you will. And now he's a champion, an award-winning lobbyist in government, working for the good. And Gene came to me with the idea about this and asked me if I'd like to do it with him, and we did. And so that was exciting for me. And the reason we wrote it is that everything's about influence. I mean, whether we want to choose a restaurant or choose a vacation spot or convince somebody to help us out, everything's about influence, persuasion. And there are language techniques and there are behavioral techniques that are extraordinarily helpful in making someone effective as an influencer. Now, if you're in business and you're trying to sell as an entrepreneur or as someone representing a company, it's even more important. And I think the rules of the road have changed considerably. Sales, for example, is no longer feet on the street. It's about really evangelism. It's about peer-to-peer reference. It's about people talking about you when you're not around. And so we thought the book would fill a void, would fill an area where people needed to pay more attention.
I'll definitely get that one too. Now, you've collaborated with really some of the top companies in that initial introduction that I gave you, top in the world, and you've spoken to all kinds of audiences. So given that vantage point, what do you think's in store for all of us? And how do we prepare ourselves for, or really best take advantage of, what's to come?
I think it was H.G. Wells had a great book and movie out called Things to Come. When I watched it 10 times, I have the tape in my library somewhere. And this was done in the 30s or 40s, Look, here's what I think we have to understand. We have to stop being afraid. My advice to everyone is stop being so afraid. Disruption and volatility, which ought to be the name of a law firm, right? Disruption and volatility. These are offensive weapons. These are not things to be afraid of. As I said earlier, I really disrupted the solo consulting profession when in the 90s I introduced value-based fees. So we have to be creators of disruption, creators of volatility. I think what's in store for us is more ambiguity and more of the unknown. Things are changing at an incredibly rapid pace. But you have to be able to be a beacon of light here and to have a clear grip on what your value is in society, with your clients, to yourselves, to your family, and so forth. Because, I mean, if you look at Ukraine and you look at supply chain problems and you look at climate change and you look at immigration debate and you look at abortion debate, I can go on and on and on. After a while, you just want to stick your head in the sand, right? Yeah. And by the way, that's a myth. Ostriches don't do that, I found out. Ostriches are too smart to do that. So we have to be our own person, and we have to know what our value is. And I think what we have to be prepared for is something short of the extremists. You know, the oceans are not going to rise and take over the coast next year. You know, in 50 years, who knows? But we have to be prepared to deal with what's actually happening to us. And what's interesting to me is that we would rather deal with conceptual esoterica than we would with real problems. So, for example, we're quite comfortable talking about climate change and what we have to do about climate change, but we engage in sort of silly recycling practices where Providence has recycling police looking into the bins to see what's in there, and because residential recycling has a very, very little impact on climate. We love talking about these vast kinds of issues, but we're not willing to invest in our school systems. And our primary and secondary level, our school systems are in terrible shape. And we need to make a much better investment for every kid entering these systems, because they are the customers. So I think to prepare ourselves for the future, we have to get a lot more pragmatic. And we have to look around us and say, we need to fix things that are in front of us instead of ignoring them and looking at things 20 years down the road.
I think that is an interesting perception too, you know, take on it. We got another question, and it is the first book that I read from you. The first book that I read from you. Now that'll be interesting. This is Nate Scott, in case you know Nate, was value-based fees. And recently, he purchased $1 million coaching. Now, if you were to mentor me to launch a new coaching business today, what are the first 3 steps you'd have me take to build a 7-figure business? Woohoo! Nate, that's great. Thank you.
First thing I'd say is don't call yourself a coach. Call yourself an expert. And therefore, your expertise is disseminated in different ways, all right? The second thing is I would identify who your ideal coaching client is, who your ideal buyer is, so I could focus on them. And the third thing is I would start to build a very strong brand in that field. And by that, I mean, I would start to write and record and converse and network about those issues in coaching for that population. And I would use contrarian, provocative, unique kinds of approaches that people haven't heard elsewhere, so you stand out in the crowd. You know, the good news is that, Nate, competition opens business. It doesn't restrict it. So, you know, Wendy's or Burger King builds a place across from McDonald's because they know people are going there to buy burgers. And the same thing, if you look at coaching, which is expanding and expanding, is because people realize they need it. The thing is, though, to become unique in the field, so you're not just a commodity in there. And by the way, I hope you got value-based fees in the 3rd edition.
Well, I hope so too. And I think that's an interesting, everybody has to look at their space and figure out and narrow it down. Isn't that the whole idea? On who's your avatar, who's your ideal customer? If you start out here trying to find everybody, you kind of find no one that you're really looking for. Any ideas or thoughts on that?
Well, I've always been a generalist in terms of I deal with processes, and so I can work in any industry. And so I deal with strategy and decision-making and conflict resolution and change management and so on. And that applies to processes that are applicable to any industry. I don't agree with specializing, because if you specialize in the fertilizer industry or the cement industry, it's too easy to get knocked out of there. And it becomes boring, frankly. So I like that kind of generalization. However, you're right in what you said, in that you have to narrow down who your buyer is, because you don't want to be all things to all people. And the higher level buyer you have, the more impact you have.
At the end of the day, what would you most like people that have attended this call today to have learned from you?
Well, think about the fact that your belief in yourself will really determine how successful you are at helping others. And it's the oxygen mask principle. They tell you all the time, don't put someone else's on until you help yourself. And the fact of life is that you cannot help others if you don't help yourself.
That's a really good thought to have. And so focus on yourself, get yourself as good as you can be and as knowledgeable maybe in this narrow field that we've talked about.
Well, constantly improve, there's no end to learning, but you have to be able to invest in yourself and to take care of yourself to help others. I had a coaching call just before this session, and I said to my client, look, you need to take two kinds of vacations. You need to go away for a week and relax. You need your batteries recharged, but also during any given day, you need to take a vacation. You need to go out and play with the dogs, or you need to go, have a drink or whatever it is you do for hobbies. But you have to recharge your batteries. And so we have to give ourselves permission to do that. But like I said, our boss today is too tough.
So we need to kind of clear our head of a lot of the minutia that is constantly swirling around us and focus on the right things. Is there something to that?
There is. And the fact is that hard work is ridiculous. What we want is smart work.
Yep. Don't work harder, work smarter. So given everything we've discussed, what are the top 3 actions that you'd like our audience to take after leaving this call today?
Well, I'm not going to give you 3. I'm going to give you 1. And it's this. If you can leave today and ask yourself, what is the best investment I can make in myself to be better so I can help other people more? And pursue that, you'll be fine. That might involve an investment. It might not involve an investment. But an investment's an investment in terms of your time and energy. It doesn't have to be financial. So what can you really do to improve? Too many of us get to a plateau, and all plateaus erode. And so consequently, the only way to coast is downhill. You can't coast uphill. So the key is to grow, and the key to growth is innovation. So what are you going to do better? What are you going to do different to continue that growth for yourself?
Well, I think what I have learned from you today, my big takeaway is that I have been broad and I'm now narrowing down to women over 60. Now, I'm 80, so I'm thinking, okay, am I too old to have women over 60? And I'm saying, no, I'm not too old. I've been through all this stuff, so maybe I could then say I'm an expert. Because I certainly have lived through those years and experienced a lot of different things. So I've learned to do that. The other thing I've learned is the takeaway from you is really focus on all of the parameters, not just book, but maybe there's blogging to do. There's all kinds of additional things I can do around that subject, but really delve deep into the subject of retirement, which a lot of people, which I think is refirement, not entire retirement. I mean, I still work every day, get up 6 o'clock, I'm still there till 6 at night because I love what I do. And if we can have the perspective of there's something else to learn, get out there and learn it, get out there and do it, regardless of your age, then that seems like that's kind of the lane you're in and I'm in as well, is even though we're older, we got a lot to give.
Well, you have to have a calling. It doesn't matter how old you are. You have to have a calling.
Yeah.
And, there's this old speaker story. You come to a stonemason, you say, what are you doing? He says, I'm laying bricks. You come to a second one, you say, what are you doing? And the stonemason says, I'm building a cathedral. And the point is the second one has more of a connection with the end result. But I think there's a third stonemason. And you ask him what he's doing. He says, I'm bringing people closer to God. That's a calling. And we all need a calling so that we're passionate about what we do and we love what we're doing. And I think that age has nothing to do with it. In fact, age brings a dimension that most people don't have who aren't at that age. We've been there and done that, and we've seen it. So, and the same thing applies when you're young. I mean, a lot of people say to me, I don't have credibility, I'm too young. The credibility comes with the value you're providing, not your age. And with the exception of maybe 5% of the population, most people who are buyers want value. and they don't care from whom it comes. But some people talk themselves out of it before they get in there. And you can't do that. You cannot assume the other person's damaged. You have to assume that they're as good as you are, and they're going to make fair judgments.
Good point. Good point. Do I have a last question? I think I do. Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share? And let's talk about your books. Let's talk about your promotion. I think that website is so interesting. I'm going to really look at that website and say, okay, what could I do to get maybe all of his things? And
Look,
that's how you could do that.
My website's alanweiss.com, ALANWEISS.com. There's free articles, there's free video, there's free podcasts, there's free everything there. I'm not trying to sell you a thing. So take advantage of all my free resources on there. The second thing is, I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn and Facebook because I have to be. But if you take a look at Twitter, for example, and other social media platforms, every day I have about a 1-minute video. It's called A Minute with Alan. And it's a 1 minute or minute and a half video about what's bothering me that day. And you can always see what's on my mind that way. So, and on my site is my blog, which is also free. So, take advantage of all those things and see if there's something that can help you.
Well, I just think it's been a fun conversation today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much.
Flew by.
I appreciate you doing it, and everybody should go on your website. Everybody should take a look at it and buy those books. I'm going to buy that next one, I'm for sure. Let's talk. I need to do a close that Donna does. She wants me to tell you a little bit about who are the upcoming guests. So December 16th, she's going to have Jennifer McGrail. She's Executive Director and Deputy Secretary of Science and Innovation for the Oklahoma Center for the Advancement of Science and Technology. Then December 23rd, there's a holiday party and networking event, and this is all virtual, so I guess you have to bring your own champagne. And then December 30th, she is still deciding exactly what she wants to do for that one. So Donna says, if you have an interest in supporting this program, then go to the Let's Share the Journey page on our website and buy us a cup of coffee. I would suggest making that a very expensive cup of coffee for Donna and her group. You can do that by https://buymeacoffee.com/purse power. So the other things that you can do for Donna and Purse Power is like and share the social media pages. That always helps. And then let your friends know about this webcast that we're doing every Friday at 10 Central, and bring a friend. So Donna's final thing is, we have it. Let's use it. And again, thank you, Alan. And if you want to come to Camas, Washington, and have a cup of coffee with me or a glass of wine, feel free.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.